The village of Hoffman Estates began in 1954 when Sam and Jack Hoffman, owners of the F&S Construction Company, bought the 160-acre Schrage Farm. This property was subdivided and developed into what became known as Parcel A, a group of 260 homes, each on 1/2 acre. This first parcel was located just east of Roselle Road between Gulf Road and Higgins Road. The new development made some residents of the farming community nervous. They were afraid that the subdivision residents would incorporate first and gain control of the area. They tried to incorporate first to gain judicial control of Hoffman Estates and future development within or near their boundaries. This move to incorporate was voted down in April of 1955. The proposed boundaries were then redrawn to exclude a large number of people opposed to the idea. On December 12, 1955, the proposition was passed and the village of Schaumburg Center was formed with 65 people. It did not include the Hoffman subdivision, but since it was within 1 1/2 miles of the boundaries, Schaumburg Center had judicial control of the area. The first homeowners began moving into the new subdivision, called Hoffman Estates, on November 30th, 1955.
We looked for a house for about a year. Charlie and I are shoppers. And we looked and we looked and we looked. And we saw models in Rolling Meadows. We saw models in Carpentersville. We saw models everywhere you could buy a house for under $15,000. Charlie and I shopped a year. We found 2 models out on Higgins Road, and you got 2 different elevations, and we said, we'll take it. We told our good friend Harriet and Mac about it, and they said, sounds good to us. They came out the next day and bought the same house.
Well, we were on our way to look at a home further west, and we passed by the models and decided we liked this area. We'd just go in and check the models. We went in and bought. It was just like that. We just loved the model and loved the area. It was all hilly and nice at that time, and just loved the area and didn't realize how much mud was out here.
Well,
we're still
the hilly
looking.
areas off.
They scraped him down the clay, which was so slippery, and it was like quicksand that every day you were out looking for your kids' boots and shoes, and they were down about 6-7 inches, and a lot of them you just didn't recover.
Yeah. He said, it's far, isn't it? And I agreed. And then the next week we came out again, and it got closer. By the 4th time, it was pretty close to Chicago. We had decided that it wasn't, you know, for a home of our own, it was close enough.
But we love the area, and we were told, why are you moving way out there? That is so far out in the sticks. Now everyone, all the relatives moved out this way, but we love it, still do.
Just find something. So we searched everywhere, and we loved this house, and I think it was Elmhurst. It was cost $25,000. It was all brick and a brick garage. We couldn't afford it. We didn't have that kind of money. So we were searching everywhere, and the further out we got, the cheaper houses got, of course. And we saw these models for $14,950. I thought, wow. There were 2 of them. We had a choice of 2 models. But the thing that got us was it was a 1/2 acre of land.
We bought for the same reason. There were just 2 models when we stopped, and by the time my husband had gotten through the second model home, he and another fellow already had the pins in the lots that we were buying.
Yeah, you throw your dart at the lot board.
Right.
Remember, we bought a home here. We were looking at homes at the time, and we had 2 children staying in an apartment in Chicago, and looking for what we could afford. And we were coming out to visiting some people out in Gary, Illinois, and we coming up Higgins Road, and we seen these models. So we went in and looked at the models, and boy, these 3 big bedrooms. We thought living room, dining room, kitchen, utility room, carport on a 1/2 acre lot for $14,900. I asked him much money down. He said $700 down and 200 closing. And he said, well, I need a deposit now. And I said, I don't have any money. So we didn't have probably much money. I don't remember at the time, but I doubt if we had more than $10 with us that day. But anyway, he said, a blank check. Do you have a blank? I have a blank check here. He says, what bank do you do business with? I said, Oak Park Bank. So on a blank check, I wrote a deposit for $100, and I wound up in a house 2 months later with $700 down, which was really a beautiful thing for young people at the time. because we were paying, our mortgage payment then was $85 a month, and we were paying at the time $130 for a one-bedroom apartment in the city. So it was really a wonderful thing for vets at that time, and I think most all of us were vets, Korean vets and World War II vets.
There were some disadvantages to living in a new development far away from Chicago. Since Hoffman Estates was the only subdivision in the area, it took a while for many of the basic necessities to be developed, like roads, for example.
We all moved in in 1956, just about the same time. The streets were unpaved. Apricot Street was a complete mud lane. I wrote the foulest letter to the developer.
When we first moved in, and if it started to rain, we had to move our cars up to Golf Road, or else we wouldn't be able to get out. You know, I remember I had a plumber in and to hook up the gas. I moved in on a Wednesday, and I found out there was no gas even going into the place. So anyway, they had to come down and put in a gas line, and the truck came with the furniture, and I had to go and get a bulldozer to have the truck pushed in and pulled in to my driveway.
Did Hoffman's people furnish that?
Yeah, Hoffman's.
Yeah, they were good about that.
Terry couldn't even get in. She was moving in the next block. The car got stuck in the mud. The moving van got stuck in the mud, and we all ran out and pushed. All the neighbors, not just us.
That was every Sunday.
Everybody in the neighborhood got out and pushed you and Bill down the road.
Yeah.
Couldn't wait to move in.
That was.
There were 3 routes.
I know.
If you met somebody coming, you backed up to the next intersection.
Yeah, right.
That was for 2 years. Come on. We didn't get our roads
it only
for
2
2 years.
Oh, it was a big day when we got gravel.
I remember when they were going to put in the roads, the Cook County zoning restrictions were that a road had to sit as a gravel road for 1 year and settle before they would allow it to be blacktopped.
From the 2-lane highways little roads that we used to have, to the highways, and the roads are quite good, and the tollways and the whole system.
Also, the instant landscaping of today was unheard of. It took a long time to develop a good-looking yard.
When we moved in, we were all young, foolish, dumb, very dumb, naive, and we took everything for granted what the builders told us. And here we had a big mound of dirt between we're next door neighbors, between her house and my house, and it was up to the telephone wires. And all of a sudden, here come the big trucks, and they're taking all the dirt out.
Beautiful black dirt.
Yes, this was beautiful, beautiful dirt. And we ran out, and I asked them where they were going with all this dirt, because it was getting low. It was getting down to the nitty-gritty. And here they were putting it all in all the backyards of the Blue Bonnet and off of Ash Road and off of Blue Bonnet. Our house looks up the hill, and all these backyards were filled with all this dirt, and they left us nothing. Well, that was when we had to get in my station wagon, I think it was that day, and we drove all over Hoffman trying to find Ed DeGan to find out when he was going to get dirt for us, because we had no dirt. They took us down to the clay. We had no dirt at all. It was clay, and it was hard.
Well, we had the hill of dirt in our backyard for months and months until the tractor got there to divvy it out.
My kids called it the Walkie Mountains. Not the Rocky Mountains. They'd walk on it when it was dry, and they called it the Walkie Mountains. They cried when they rototilled it down.
It was so dry. Every time the wind blew, I'd have a half inch of dirt on my windowsills.
100 degrees, you shut your windows.
Yeah, it was either that.
Clay flow.
Right. Oh, it was fun. And we went wild with bushes and trees. Any little twig you find, you planted it. Or seed, just planted it.
We had no trees, just little twigs.
We wouldn't know what kind of tree it was anyway. It was green, we planted it.
You're right.
Another thing that I remembered was putting the grass in those half acres that we had, and 3 families, the McGees and the Paganis and us, and the Oltians got a big plank, and they put big nails in a big board and took a car and scratched all the 3 lots. And then we all threw seed on it, and that's the original grass 32 years later. That was really fun.
We had no yards, just big, huge mounds of dirt. And these men we gave them cold drinks, and they leveled our yards eventually, kind of, sort of. And then we had to put the whole yard in. We had to sod it, or no, nobody could afford sod. Did you have sod?
No,
you had seed.
No, we had seed.
Nobody
Everybody
had sod.
had seed.
You went out and bought, 10 cents worth of grass seed, and you threw it in and then watered. We had half acres, and you had to water a half an acre. Charlie spent the first summer cutting our weeds in our yard because we didn't have anything there, but the weeds grew. So he would take our hand lawnmower, which was about 18 inches, and take it out and mow a half acre of weeds with it.
One of the best times we had that really at the time wasn't considered a great time was the fact that we had to lay the sod in our backyard. They dropped off like 5-6 pellets of sod, which I don't know if everybody knows, really weighs a substantial amount. So myself and 2 friends put all the sod down in one day, and I remember it was just before it started raining, which of course was good for the sod. And actually it was really kind of, now we planted our own grass in our yard, so it was a lot of fun.
As we moved in, other people our age moved in with new babies and kids, and we all had to learn how to put sod in the yards together and how to negotiate with the builder to get certain things done, and we built some lifelong relationships.
So you had a carport, and then you had mud out to the street, which was mud. So we put Michael out on the carport on his little trike, and
playpens.
And we had playpens out on our little carports.
They were co-ed playpens because Jane had all boys and I had all girls. So we just kept plunking these babies in the playpens. And the children have remained good friends too for these 30-some years.
Initially, fire protection was a problem for the residents of Hoffman Estates, as the nearest fire station was in Roselle. The resulting high fire insurance premiums and the uneasiness of the residents led to the establishment of a volunteer fire department. It was formed in December of 1956.
I was appointed trustee pro tem in order to form a fire district. Out of 2 others, our closest fire protection was Roselle. And so to start with, we had a volunteer fire group, and we collected donations, $25 per house.
$25 a house.
To buy a fire truck. And the fire truck was housed in the old Hammerstein Farm barn. And that was our first fire station. And as a result of this, for the first time, seceded from 2 other fire districts, Roselle and Palatine, and formed Hoffman Estates Fire Protection District, which operated as a separate entity until, I believe, mid-70s, when it was transferred to the village, and it's now a village fire department.
We collected money for the first firehouse that was built. Was collected, the money, a big portion of the money was collected from the homeowners. That was,
remember when they bought the
down
first
payment on the first fire truck.
Fire engine, yeah, they $25 a home they asked for.
That's right.
And we all gave it to them.
Then that, they wouldn't put out the fire.
Well,
we went door to door.
But anyhow, I think it lowered our fire rates from like a 9 to a 6.
One of the primary considerations for a new fire district was to lower our fire insurance. We were 5 miles from the nearest fire station, and the rates were very high, so that was a motivation to get a new fire district started.
Well, one of our pitches, which was quite true, was that when we levied a tax to support the fire district, this was the only tax that people made money on. They saved more from fire insurance than the cost of the taxes to support the fire district.
I remember that. I remember the first fire department going up right there on Flagstaff. We lived right on Grand Canyon and Flagstaff. So I saw it all.
Years ago, we had a volunteer fire department, and Bob was on it, and about half of Apricot Street, I think. Maddie was one of the original members. And then the women came along, as women do, and formed an auxiliary. And we would make coffee and sandwiches and donuts for anybody that had a fire. We would be out there running around doing these little things that you do for fires. And our biggest, well, we had two big things. One was when we raised the money for our own ambulance and fire department, and it must have been, I think, the coldest winter ever in history. And we walked around house to house signing up all of these people in parcel B, C, D, clear out Illinois Boulevard asking for money. Do you remember that? Sometimes it was so cold the ink would freeze in our pens. We couldn't even write their pledges. They would have to give us their pens, But it was a lot of fun.
Volunteers were trained by the Roselle Fire Department. The first medical center in Hoffman Estates was opened October 14, 1957, in a tri-level house on Aztec Road, now called Ash Road. It housed Dr. Ivan Vasquez, an internist, Dr. A.E. Waxler, a dentist, Dr. V.J. Bavetta, an optometrist, and Dr. C.A. Salea, a pediatrician.
But it was a great relief when they built the hospital at 1555 Barrington Road, because otherwise we'd have had to go to Northwest Community, and that's pretty far if you need to go to an emergency room.
To fill the needs for schools in the area, F&S Construction Company built several schools, including Twinbrook, Blackhawk, Fairview, and Hoffman schools, and donated them to School District 54. By 1958, 811 students were enrolled. High school students were bused to Palatine High School until 1964, when Conant High School was built in Hoffman Estates. Blackhawk School is now the Schaumburg Township offices.
You look at our school system. My kids are both in the school system right now, District 211 and District 54. Teachers, principals, everyone is involved in I can't tell you. I walk through the schools and I couldn't be more proud of what we have here in Hoffman Estates.
Our schools. There's none like it in any surrounding area or in Illinois and perhaps across the Midwestern states. District 54 and District 211 are also world-renowned school districts.
Hoffman Estates High School is an award-winning, nationally recognized blue ribbon high school. People value their education, and that's what makes a community great.
As Hoffman Estates grew, some residents began to want a local government. Schaumburg was approached but declined to annex them. Incorporation of Hoffman Estates was approved on September 19, 1959 by a vote of 759 to 569. On November 7th, the first village president, 6 trustees, a clerk, and a magistrate of police were elected and began functioning officially on November 12th with a budget of $6,206, which was donated by F&S Construction Company. Hoffman Estates was then less than 8,000 residents, and the incorporated area was under 3 square miles. The next month, the village took the deed to the Hammerstein farm buildings and land that became Chino Park, donated to the village by F&S Construction, who had been using the buildings as their offices. These buildings were used as the first village hall complex until 1972, when the new municipal building on Gannon Drive was opened. Beginning in 1961, 2,000 acres north of the tollway were annexed into Hoffman Estates. This area now includes Winston Knolls, Poplar Hills, Westbury, and the Paul Douglas Forest Preserve. This annexation more than doubled the incorporated land area.
We were concerned that those people that were running the village at the time were simply incompetent, not up to the task. We would discover later, when a number of them were indicted by the state's attorney, that they also were corrupt. And so I was co-chair of the campaign, myself and Dick Regan. Dick would go on to be head of the planning board for Hoffman Estates, and there's a room over at the police department which is named for him. But I helped to elect Virginia Hayter, Bruce Lynn, Darrell Rathman, Ralph Lyerla, and Fred Downey. Fred Downey was our candidate for mayor and they completely swept the election.
Hoffman Estates, the government of Hoffman Estates was reeling from scandal. They had several people who had been indicted, some who went to jail, and with the exception of some wonderful people, specifically the late Bruce Lind and wonderful Virginia Hayter, who was mayor at the time, they pulled this community back up on its feet with honesty and integrity.
In 1965, 3,300 acres west of Barrington Road were annexed. Originally planned as Leisure World, an adult community, a majority of the land was purchased by the Cook County Board and became the Poplar Creek Forest Preserve after plans for Leisure World failed. Hoffman Estates grew steadily during the 60s and increased dramatically by the mid-70s. Between 1970 and 77, the number of households more than doubled from 5,337 to 11,860. The area had spread to over 18 square miles and 33,575 residents, according to the 1977 census. In the early years of Hoffman Estates, there were few social activities for residents to participate in. Out of this need, the Hoffman Estates Women's Club was formed in 1957. One branch of the group helped to establish the first library in Schaumburg Township. It was named after Arthur Hammerstein, a producer of musical comedies on Broadway and the uncle of songwriter Oscar Hammerstein. The farm, owned by Arthur and his wife Dorothy Dalton, a famous silent screen star, was one of the first purchased by F&S Construction. One farm building, the barn, was the first fire department. Later, it was the Boys Club. And the other was the village hall and police department. At first, the library books were housed in a grade school and later in a bungalow near the Roselle and Schaumburg Road intersection.
The library was a four-room house down on the corner of what? Roselle Road and
Schaumburg Road.
Schaumburg Road?
Yeah.
And it was just a four-room house. And one room was the office and had the coffee pot in it.
House, right?
And yeah, it could have been.
Yeah, it was.
And then three rooms of books, and the books were all donated. I mean, every book you checked out said, you know, to Susie from Grandma or something like that. And what the years must have been 1955 or 59 or 60. No, probably by then we were getting regular books. But that's how I recall anyway that it started. Jane and Ad are probably more the experts on starting the library, but we'd go down to this little four-room house and take books out.
And Adeline was hired to work at that point with the first librarian, Colleen Amundsen, who was still going to school. She didn't have her degree yet, and the periodicals department was in the bathroom. There was a bedroom that had children's books, and there was the living room that had adult books.
In 1965, Schaumburg Township Public Library was built on Library Lane. It has now grown to 80,000 square feet and nearly 400,000 volumes. It has the second largest circulation in Illinois. It is now officially known as the Schaumburg Township District Public Library.
Some of our institutions, once again, were part of Schaumburg Township, and so that puts us in the position that we have a world-class library that is known all over the country, and that stemmed from the good people that were interested in forming a library. That began in Hoffman Estates.
Other early social activities included the Theater Guild, formed by a group of residents interested in performing. On December 5, 1958, their first production, The Tender Trap, was put on at the Blackhawk School. A babysitters co-op was also formed. Members not only sat for each other, but got together for coffee and conversation once a month at each other's homes.
Coffee clutches every day. We had a barbecue every week.
Right.
It was fun.
Something,
It was
right.
fun.
We formed our own mothers' clubs out here because none of our kids were old enough to babysit, right?
Right. We didn't have the money to.
We didn't have
we all
money.
had infants.
Yeah.
Right.
So the mothers pooled their time, and you got hours in exchange.
All of us had children, and of course there were no teenagers or anybody, and we always had some place to go in the city because we came from the city, and so we had a babysitters group, and there were about within 4 blocks we must have had about 40 people that we got together and we had the fathers and the mothers could sit with the other children, and we had a whole a bookkeeping system. You could use up to 15 hours, which would be a minus 15 on your card, and then you could give 15 hours. You could have a plus 15. And it worked out beautifully. We never worried about leaving our children because we knew they were in good hands. And we were able to continue socially with our friends and relatives, you know.
Well, we formed a bowling league. Women's had a bowling
we bowled for several years.
And
Women's club?
Yeah. And in '59, we formed a golf club.
PTA. Oh my God, we started from scratch.
And if you staggered your kids, you were in forever. I was in for 17 years.
You always learn not to ever say any suggestion because somebody would say, good, you do it.
Yes. She just volunteered.
There was always the doers.
Yeah, right.
It was a great place to raise kids, and we all had good times. I enjoyed the babysitting club. Somebody must have talked about the babysitting club. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed PTA. I really did. We had Girl Scout troops and campfire troops, and for the boys.
Well, and when you had all those groups, they were all neighborhood kids.
Yeah,
so you knew the kids and you knew the parents.
Yeah.
And there was actually a cul-de-sac down the street from us with 8 houses and 32 kids. And there wasn't a kid that was over the age of 12. And so it was very easy for your children to go out in the morning, find somebody to play with, and that's where they were. And you never worried about them because at that time it was still pretty much stay-at-home moms.
Back when I was growing up, the Village Hall was on Illinois Boulevard, and there were a bunch of old barns. The Boys Club was there. The 4th of July festivities were held at Chino Park there, and I remember playing baseball and being able to play at Chino, and then everyone going to the Dog and Suds, which was on Roselle Road, and just having a good time with our ice cream. The bike parade, where all the kids in the community would line up on Kankakee Boulevard at Illinois, and when the proper part of the parade came by, they'd release us into the parade, and we got to ride our bikes all decorated up down there.
There was only 5 high school kids in the area, and they started the first boys club, and they got the Hammerstein barn, and they had to clean out all the rooms up there, and they did such a good job that later on we had a lot of stake dances and parties there, and it was really the beginning of a boys club there. And I had my boys, I was the oldest one in the neighborhood, and I had 2 boys in high school, and it was fun for them because they just loved it. They always loved it here.
I don't remember that at all. Well, the Teen Barn initially was a boys club.
Yeah.
Affair.
We began the boys club from scratch because there was nothing out here, and a group of us got together and decided the kids. But that was later on. The boys club began probably in the early '60s, and they took the barn and renovated it partially, and it was under the auspices of the Chicago Boys Club, and then it eventually was lost. That charter was lost, and it became kind of a youth center. But there was a period of about 5, 6, 7 years where it was really under the charter of the Chicago Boys Club. It was never a real popular spot. For some reason or other, the kids just didn't seem to gravitate towards the boys club. I don't know what was wrong. It may have been the leadership, it may have been the place, it may have been the facilities, I don't know.
Or the time.
Or the times, yeah.
Didn't you play baseball?
Yeah, I played Little League. Started when I was 5 years old down at Twin Brook School, and that was before T-ball. That back then they had the coaches pitch underhand to the kids because none of the kids could throw the ball over the plate at that age. And but yeah, I played in Little League, and then Little League and Pony League, and all the way through. And But it started down at Twinbrook. We used to play a lot of games down at Twinbrook, just pickup games, baseball games. We'd go down there at Twinbrook and play.
In the early years of Hoffman Estates, the different religious groups met wherever they could find the space. On October 27, 1957, ground was broken for Prince of Peace Lutheran Church, the first church built in the village at the corner of Roselle Road and Illinois Boulevard. Roman Catholics met at the Buggy Whip Tavern, where several volunteers would arrive early Sunday mornings to clear tables and chairs from the dining room. To complete the conversion into a place of worship, a portable altar, lights, and chairs were set up for Mass.
Well, that was our first church out here, and we would have our masses on Sunday morning with the smell of beer and everything. Yeah, it wasn't the bug. Well, yeah, it was. Yeah, it was a saloon, a real saloon. But we did have our first masses in the church, and everybody came, and we finally built the church later on.
After Mass, everything would have to be removed and restored for business as usual by 12:30 p.m. Anxious to find a new home, parishioners had a chapel built in 1958. This would be followed by St. Hubert's Church. The Episcopalians first gathered in 1959 at the Fairview School Gymnasium. That same year, Holy Innocents Episcopal Church began to take shape. The Presbyterians formed their church in early 1959 and met at Schaumburg Junior High. In 1960, the Church of the Cross was chartered and services were held in both English and Korean. Jewish high holiday services were held at the Homeowners Association Community Center called the Barn, while Sunday school and Friday services were at Twinbrook School. The Methodists first began meeting in a residence home.
We'd been here for about 2 years, and we're very active Methodists, and we'd gone with our 2 little girls to the Palatine Methodist Church for 2 years, and I'd keep writing the district superintendent and the bishop and say, we need a church here, and they'd look at this 200 houses and say, you need a church here? Yes, we do need a church here. So in 1958, it was November 1957, the first meeting was in our house to start the first church in Hoffman Estates, and it's called Our Savior's United Methodist Church, and we incorporated in March 1958, and it's been a wonderful influence on all the community.
Holy Innocents, somebody thought that up. My husband laughed and was hoping they wouldn't wish it on us, but they did. And it started in a hallway in Hoffman School in 1959, it had started a couple of weeks before we discovered there was one. But we were among the earliest parishioners there, missioners. It never really became a parish. But they shared a priest with St. Nicholas Church in Elk Grove Village, which was founded pretty much the same time, a little bit before us.
On Sundays to go to Mass, we'd have to go to the Buggy Whip, which was a tavern the night before. So there wasn't a Catholic church. We had to go, even Catholic school, we had to go to St. Teresa's by bus.
St. Teresa's, we went for church. Finally, Father Sullivan came out to this tavern on Roselle Road. It was called the Buggy Whip Lounge. The Buggy Whip Lounge. And he said, he threw a sheet over the bar, and we had Mass, and Tony and our son and some of the men put some folding chairs up, and they had Mass there, and Father Sullivan called it Old St. Buggy Whip. Until Tony went around with the men, took pledges to build St. Hubert's Church.
In 1961, shortly after incorporation, there was a Jewel food store and a drugstore and a Ben Franklin store built on the east side of Roselle Road, facing Higgins Road. This came to be known as Hoffman Plaza, and in 1966 a post office was added. Where did residents shop for the 6 years before this?
And if you ran out of milk or bread, you could go up to the tavern on the corner. They would stock bread and milk for us, so we could walk up to the tavern and get our bread and milk. And our big shopping was Palatine or Roselle, which was 7 miles away, seven and a half. Well, they didn't have a grocery store. That was for groceries. It was Palatine and Roselle.
But the farmer was there, and we could buy eggs if you got there early enough. They would still have them, otherwise they were all gone. But we could get our eggs there. And if company came out, and if they were low on gas, they just stayed overnight because there wasn't a gas station. We did not have a gas station.
That's right.
Our husbands used to park the car up on Golf Road and bring the groceries down to our home, down because we were in the middle, lower. They would bring the box of groceries down because they couldn't drive the cars. It was all mud and clay. They had to leave the cars parked up on Golf Road, and our mailboxes were up there. We had to walk up there to get our mail.
Right on Golf Road.
Yes, no problem.
At that time, right.
You could stop, get your mail leisurely. Get a loaf of bread. We had to go to Palatine or Roselle, which is about, either one was about 6 miles to go just for the food.
No, you went shopping once a week.
Yes. The husbands went because that's the only card. We had one card then.
Usually you had one car in a family, and that was for the father or husband, what have you, to get to work. And I think most everybody worked in towards the city, because most people came out from the city to come here initially.
My husband worked in Elmhurst, Charlie worked
Yeah,
in
because we used to have a day a week that
It was
leave
every
the girls,
other week, as I recall.
leave the
it.
girls
I
a
got
car,
one
and then we
week,
would share a
Jane,
ride. I'd either drop Mac off at the airport, or he would drop me off at Harvester,
and then that was the day of leisure, because all Jane and I had to do was pile 6 kids in the car and take our $20 bill and go over to Rolling Meadows
or Roselle,
and do our grocery shopping.
Yeah.
$20 covered groceries. If you were unfortunate enough to have dry cleaning in that week, why, that came out of your $20 bill. And if the kids were invited to a birthday present, we went down to the dime store and bought probably $3.50, $3.75 or something. That's what we used to pay for kids' birthday presents.
Actually, Harriet's exaggerating how much money we had for grocery shopping. She had $20. I had $15.
but she had to buy 2 cartons of cigarettes.
But she had to buy 2 cartons of cigarettes.
There was one stoplight between Manheim and our house. One stoplight, nothing but farmers. We'd get up in the morning, we'd hear the cows moving, and we could hear the trains in Roselle. And we used to get our eggs right at the corner of Roselle and Goff, Roselle and Higgins. At Roselle and Higgins, the only store was a tavern.
There were no supermarkets. There were no groceries. We went to the town of Roselle, to Gorski's, or Rolling Meadows had a Jewel. So if anybody, one of the girls would have a car at that time, and they would call and say, I'm going to the store, you would drop everything and go, not the children though, no, we didn't drop them, but we would go onto the store and shop. Otherwise, we went in the evening.
The first industry started in Hoffman Estates in August of 1965 when Thomas Engineering began processing pharmaceuticals on Central Road. They also developed the process for sugar coating pills and candy, such as M&Ms. There is no mystery where the name Hoffman Estates came from. It was named for the father and son, Sam and Jack Hoffman, who built the first houses in 1955. According to Buzz Hoffman, Sam's grandson and vice president of the Hoffman Group, descendant of the old F&S Construction Company, builders at the time didn't spend much time or creativity thinking up names for new subdivisions. Developers frequently called new neighborhoods estates, heights, or meadows. The Hoffman part seemed logical. We thought we'd attach a little personal significance to it. There were several names on the ballot in March of 1958 when a name had to be selected for the community's incorporation the next year. Twinbrook was selected by popular vote, but overruled by association directors. To settle the controversy, another vote was taken on June 21st, in which all residents, registered to vote or not, were eligible to vote for the name of the village if incorporation was approved. The choices were Hoffman Estates, Twinbrook, or a write-in. The name Hoffman Estates was chosen in this special election.
The school board election, then we had when we had the homeowners association election, and then
naming the village.
Well,
how many votes did we take on the
naming the village, and then whether to incorporate or not to incorporate. We had those votes, And then when we finally did get incorporated, and then we had a vote for the actual
Right.
elections, and that, which you were very much involved with.
Well, I recommended they name it Twinbrook instead of Hoffman Estates. I was on the committee that
was
to what kind of government
That was a good name.
you selected.
Yeah, it was a good
You know,
name, other than
mayor or whatever we have now, trustee bit.
It was Hoffman Estates
Because they had
or
unincorporated
Twinbrook.
at the time.
And we had a vote on it.
Yeah.
And when we voted, Hoffman Estates
Well,
got
the
the most votes.
association, I think, is against it because Hoffman was still contributing a lot to the schools.
Yeah.
The building the schools
Oh,
and
yeah,
the grounds.
for every,
they didn't want insulting.
for every
so they
place.
left it Hoffman Estates.
Yeah. And there was a Hoffman.
Now he's dead.
The reason,
Suicide to bankrupt, you know.
the reason why we had to leave it Hoffman
there.
Estates
It was there.
was because of the Hoffman, Illinois, down in southern Illinois.
That was the difference.
There's a little town
Oh,
of
is that right?
300.
Yeah.
And because of that town of 300 in southern Illinois, which was 300 years ago,
Yeah.
and it's still 300.
Yeah.
But even though we had more population, we couldn't use the name Hoffman, Illinois, so we had to keep the estates on there to use it.
Today, Hoffman Estates covers an estimated 18.3 square miles, 15,295 households, and 45,200 people. It is part of the Golden Corridor, the Northwest Suburban Expansion, and pathway of commercial and residential progress.
When I came to this community, Hoffman Estates, the government of Hoffman Estates was reeling from scandal. They had several people who had been indicted, some who went to jail, and with the exception of some wonderful people, specifically the late Bruce Lind and wonderful Virginia Hayter, who was mayor at the time, they pulled this community back up on its feet with honesty and integrity. And it's continued to move on from there. If you go to the late Mayor O'Malley, who was able to bring the Sears people in town, and continuing on with Mayor McLeod, this wonderful leadership in this community has taken this from a bedroom community to a really international community that it is today.
Your leadership here, the mayors and other people in village government, have been so cooperative and so helpful to Holy Family Parish. That's greatness, to reach out to people, work with a church in a spirit of collaboration and cooperation, just trying to make things good for the people that live in this area. It's been a privilege to work with the leaders of Hoffman Estates.
So the Growing to Greatness was in the heart and soul of an individual such as Bruce Lind. And he's a former trustee who was intimately involved in the decision to relocate the village hall from Gannon and Goff to here on Hassel. And in fact, at one time, the decision was no. And I remember Bruce Lind coming into an executive session, as I break that confidentiality, so many years later. Bruce Lind said, we have got to do something. We must think long term. That insurance building is open over there on Hassel. If we don't act now, we may never see a better opportunity for the taxpayers.
The village government consists of 305 full and part-time employees. Of those, the police department boasts 58 officers, 36 civilian support people, 9 sergeants, 4 lieutenants, 2 assistant chiefs, and 1 chief. The fire department includes 51 firefighters, 9 lieutenants, 3 captains, 1 assistant chief, and 1 chief. These personnel include 28 paramedics and 14 water recovery specialists, the largest in the northwest suburbs. There are 3 fire stations in Hoffman Estates. The price of housing has risen from around $15,000 in 1955 to between $65,000 and $400,000 for a single-family home. Townhomes and condominiums range from $40,000 to $200,000, and apartments from $450 to $750 a month.
We decided to go look at model homes. Luckily, Hoffman built something within our reach. Up until those days, you had to have 1/3 down for a house. The houses were around 9,000, so you had to have at least 3. And it put it way out of reach of most young people. So when these ads came in the paper, 1,500 down non-GIs, 800 down for GIs, ex-GIs, we thought, well, we'll go look at those models. And then we signed up for 25-year mortgage, like I said, in the middle of a snowstorm, in the middle of a farm field.
we were looking for something out in the suburbs that was affordable, and Hoffman Estates provided that opportunity. We moved out in 1959, and there was nobody here then except cornfields and all sorts of farm fields and no traffic and affordable housing. We bought the top of the line home from Hoffman Rosner, and it was $19,900, and you can't find a cabin for that today.
The Hoffman Estates Park District, organized in 1964, covers over 347 acres at 46 different sites. This includes 8 buildings and a pool. Among them are Willow Creek Racquet Club and Blackhawk Community Center.
The Park District has come to a wonderful, wonderful institution.
The Hoffman Estates Park District, I get to brag a little here, is right now one of the 4 final this for the National Gold Medal Award, which represents the best park district for park districts 50,000 to 100,000 people. What can be better when you grow to greatness?
We lived on Highland Pond, and I'll tell you, Rika, I used to spend every day at that pond, either fishing in the summer or running around the pond, or the park district had a lot of great activities. And one thing that that doesn't happen anymore is that pond, when it froze over in the wintertime, was so wonderful. That was a winter wonderland. It was so great because they put lights up, and you were able to go skating on the ice, and they had a warming house there.
A lot of it for me would be the park districts and how that's developed, the golf course, the playing fields. When I was first going on, we always were petitioning to get the playing fields. And the conditions, and there's so many better fields than when my kids grew up, and the next generation will probably even get better fields.
Poplar Creek Music Theater, the largest outdoor theater in the Chicago area with seating for 20,000, is adjacent to the Poplar Creek Forest Preserve.
Probably my fondest memory personally, however, was the availability of the Poplar Creek Music Theater to have the world-class entertainment within a couple of miles of my home, and being able to avail myself to a number of those entertainers from one extreme to the other.
Poplar Creek, when we had the amphitheater there, just brings back such awesome, awesome memories. The kids graduating from there, you know, the pomp and circumstance.
40% of the village is permanent open space and is comprised of parks, 3 golf courses, and forest preserves.
We have about a third of our village in forest preserve, which is something you cannot buy anywhere as land.
Commerce has grown from a roadside tavern to 10 shopping centers and a 65-acre industrial park and several major office complexes. There is also Humana Hospital with 356 beds and an adjoining 65,000 square foot doctor's building.
But it was a great relief when they built the hospital, because otherwise we'd have had to go to Northwest Community, and that's pretty far if you need to go to an emergency room.
Adjacent to the hospital is Alden Poplar Creek, a 217-bed skilled and intermediate care nursing facility, and the Benchmark at Poplar Creek, a 253-unit retirement facility. In addition to the local medical and dental practices, Hoffman Estates has the Ready Aid Immediate Care Center, the North Suburban Clinic, and ARC, Addiction Recovery Center.
The village is still growing, and I think the point I would like to make is the joy I had in the actual growing, probably negotiating 20 annexation agreements and development agreements. When I came, most of the Central Core was developed, and the village had just won a case on the Winston Knowles subdivision where South Barrington, as always, I spent all 34 years litigating with them on some issue or the other. And this time it was whether you could annex over a tollway, and the court found that they could. I even used that with Poplar Creek later to annex over the EJ&E Railroad. But
projects for 2 major corporations, Siemens Gamasonics and Ameritech, are scheduled for completion in 1989 and the early 1990s. Over the last 30 years, Hoffman Estates has grown from a bedroom community to a self-sufficient village with all the conveniences one expects these days. Gone are the days when residents had to go to other communities to fill the needs of everyday life.
It was a growing community.
And there were, at the time, there was a lot of interest on the part of the city fathers. They wanted the community to be a community of homes. And that has a good sound to it. Unfortunately, if all you have is homes, that's your tax base. And if you're going to develop as a village and really do the things that are necessary, it means that your individual homeowners are going to be paying for that. And so one of the things that we were interested in, the people who replaced the prior group, was bringing in business. And obviously bringing in the kind of business that would be an enhancement community, very much as Schaumburg did. There was a long time there that we were competing with Schaumburg. And the people who had been in power before would turn down an auto dealership because they said auto dealerships weren't very pretty to look at. And so the auto dealer then would go to the village of Schaumburg and literally move directly across the street from where he would have been located in Hoffman Estates. We still had to look at it, and now we weren't getting any advantage of the sales tax. And obviously, auto dealers are pretty lucrative in that sense, for a community of being able to get their share of price of a car. So that was one of the things that I thought had to happen, and it did. And of course, it went on, and the fact that we are today, the location where AT&T is, or Sears, and a great many other businesses, that's been a credit to the community, and it's made a real difference.
There were a number of things that occurred in the village prior to the 70s that caused the community to either determine whether it was going to be a small bedroom community or if it was going to be a full service community. One being the 5,000 acres of forest preserve land that was taken from the village. And the village was farsighted enough to first of all, file a suit with the state in order to permit a community to go across the tollway for annexation purposes, and the other one was to pick up about 3,000 acres on the far west end of the village. And during the time that I was here, the board worked very hard on bringing water and sewer services to that property, not having an idea at that time of what would happen, but we knew that if we had taken care of the infrastructure, that something would happen. And now we have a number of very large people such as Sears and others that are out on that property, and others to come.
I think the most important thing, addition, if you will, to Hoffman Estates, notwithstanding the fact that we have about a third of our village in forest preserve, which is something you cannot buy anywhere as land. It's very nice of the open space, but the addition of Prairie Stone, as now, originally back in the 80s, that was going to be Expo. And Tom Origer, who owned the Chicago Fire, sports team, he owned all that land. It's about 768 acres or something like that out there. And that was going to be an expo. It was going to have its own landing strip, and corporations would have displays of their manufactured wares and things like that. It would be like a convention center, but where the actual goods could be shown off. It was a wonderful idea, but it never got off the ground. And then Mr. Origer died of a heart attack. But I think the movement of the Sears Center and then Illinois Bell, which is now, of course, AT&T, up on Lakewood, Siemens, some of the large corporations that came into town really got this village on the right foot to being a great place to live.
I think the fact that we were able to get Ameritech to move in was a turning point as far as the economy of this community is concerned. Because that area that they're on is the most rolling territory in all of Cook County. Our zoning laws at the time would only allow buildings to be built so high off the ground. We came up with the idea that they could build so many feet from sea level, which meant that they could put the tall buildings on the low spots and the shorter buildings on the tall spots. Ameritech bought that and they moved in. I think that was a real turning point in the growth of this community, to get a company like Ameritech to move in.
Out west, there was nothing, and the first annexation was the Poplar Creek Theater area, Robert Niederlander of the Niederlander Theater family came to us and pitched this outdoor theater he wanted to build. And we said, well, we have no sewers and water, and you're certainly going to need that. He was willing to build from Barrington Road out to Route 59, sewer and water. And the Barringtons, Barrington Hills, South Barrington, again, objected, and it was 19 hearings over 5 months with experts on both sides fighting the theater. We knew they were going to file suit, but Mr. Niederlander, God bless him, put $1 million in the ground in earth moving and $1 million in infrastructure before the suit was filed. Under a theory of vested rights, the theater kept on building while we kept on litigating. Into the third or fourth season, the litigation was complete in the Illinois Supreme Court, and eventually the developer, Mr. Niederlander, and the Barringtons settled, but the theater went on. That in itself was not enough to develop the West because there was just that one sewer and water line, and that's a lifeline of development. Again, a helicopter landed, and Governor Thompson and William Brennan of Sears got off, and they said, hey, we have an idea to keep Sears in Illinois. They were headed to Charlotte or Dallas, and they asked for our cooperation, and we said yes.
We were working on this one small development project. It was with this company called Sears. And they were looking at the possibility of purchasing some land here in Hoffman Estates. And I remember I was going back and forth with a guy by the name of Doug Ellsworth, who was our finance director at the time. And the individual from Sears said, hey, I've got a document. We'd like to fax it to you. What's your fax number? Not only did we not have a fax number, we didn't have a fax machine. So I said, let me call you back. And I ran down to Doug and I said, Doug, what are we going to do? And Doug grabbed some cash out of the petty cash, jumped in a car, and went to an office supply store here in Hoffman Estates, right over on Roselle Road, bought a fax machine, learned how to use it from the store clerk, realized we could plug it into any old line, got it back here, we plugged that thing in, we did a test run, called them back, told them the number, they faxed us the document, we got it. I don't think we ever saved the document as our first ever Hoffman Estates fax, but that's literally how it came down.
We suddenly saw $80 million of infrastructure, 2 exits on the tollway, the widening of 59 and 72, new large sewer interceptor down to Irving Park. Much happened, and it happened very quickly. Sears had an 800-acre development, and their home office was only 200 acres. Mr. Brennan said, well, you know, when we built the Sears Tower, we doubled the value of the South Loop, and we're not going to let that happen again. So Sears reaps the benefits of what they're able to develop on the balance of the 600 acres. That infrastructure, of course, allowed the building along Shoe Factory, which, although the village pushed for commercial, ended up mostly residential. And the land to the west of Beverly Road is still under consideration development. The first annexation agreement, I recall, we wrote in 1979, and we've extended and extended it, and someday we're going to grow to greatness out there as well.
The development commercially, the commercial development of Hoffman Estates. My husband was chairman of the Plan Commission for a number of years, so I understood a lot more because he would bring home the ideas when the Sears Center first went up. We have corporate headquarters like Claire's and their new building, and Ameritech, of course. All of these new things, Poplar Creek Music Theater, we were there. We went to a number of concerts there, and the 4th of July was there, the fireworks. Now we have a new amphitheater that's coming in. We have the Prairie Center. We have the Sears Center, and we have professional hockey team practices at our park district. We have Cabela's. We have so many big corporations, big attractions. Northern Illinois University. The young people and the older people that are sprucing up on their education don't have to go all the way down to DeKalb. We have that. And Northern is a wonderful school. We have our community itself. I don't think we could have had a better place for our children to grow up in, because of its heterogeneous community with all the nationalities. Look at our food venue and with the Cultural Arts Commission. We have all of that, and our children learn, and they grow up together, and they learn what this world really is. And they have made wonderful friendships. I just can't say enough about growing up here and being a part of this village.
We used to go to a farm stand that was on Higgins Road, almost to Elgin. Huge farm. And now it's the site of Sears. So when you look around, I think, and see what Hoffman Estates has become, I'd say growing to greatness has been a good start when they first selected that motto, and they have worked very hard. They, the government and the people that live here, have worked very hard to make it what it is today.
Keeping Sears in Illinois was a great feat to bring them to Hoffman Estates. But I think the greatest are the residents. We've had so many commissions, and they're all volunteer. They put many, many hours, myself included, 25 years on the 4th of July festival, and nobody's paid, but yet they work so hard at all these commissions. And I don't think I've ever met a resident that I didn't really care for. I think we've got great leadership on the board, and just residents. I think that's the greatest asset.
Your leadership here, the mayors and other people in village government, have been so cooperative and so helpful to Holy Family Parish. That's greatness, to reach out to people, work with a church in a spirit of collaboration and cooperation, just trying to make things good for the people that live in this area. It's been a privilege to work with the leaders of Hoffman Estates. And then what amazes me is, as you drive out near Sears and Prairie Stone, the expansiveness of the village, the new homes that are going up.
I feel there's developed so nicely and so gradually that you hardly notice the transformation from a little tiny village with 262 houses, I think we had originally, up until what is today 50, 60,000 people, whatever it is, and all the industry and the development business-wise around here. It's just pleasant to see and pleasant to think back on.
As you look back, we've accomplished it, and we've accomplished it not only through all the things I just talked about, but also by providing it so it's economical to live here too, by mixing businesses and commercial and providing jobs, but yet providing great restaurants and shopping adventures. So it's a complete community, and let's face it, that's what greatness truly is having a great place to live in, having a fun place to live, and just having a great quality of life.
There became a reality in the community of Hoffman Estates that if you wanted better services, if you wanted more services, that if you don't have a commercial base, if you don't have a business base, the only source of tax revenue then comes from the residents themselves. And I think as the community matured, I think the village board, the administration of the village board of the village decided that they had to go out and reach out and get more businesses, and that generated additional tax revenue. And as we can look at Mayor O'Malley's forethought, and that board decided that they were going to do Prairie Stone Industrial Center, and most of our growth in the business arena has been out west, and so I think it's been good for the community to get that tax base, and we have a lot of them businesses in and around now, and I think it's a favorable business community.